And welcome back. As we go ahead and look forward, we have a pretty good working game here. However, there's some small things that we need to address. So for example, if I got my player here and he's moving along down the hill and he's going along, I'm going to go ahead and let's go ahead and get him to crash here. Boop. You might notice that we can kind of keep moving after we've already crashed. So, and you might see we also have like some double sound effects kind of playing in here. All right, so there's some things that we want to clean up with that. So what we're going to want to do is to find a way for effectively our crash detector and our player controller to talk to each other, so that way when, for example, our crash detector says, hey, we've crashed, we can say, hey, stop moving so we don't initiate more crashes. And right now, if we look at our code, there's not really a way for us to do that. So here I am in my script. So I'm just going to move crash detector over so it's next to player control. If I look here, all my methods that I have set up right now are all private. All right, so we have private void here. We have private void here. So these are all private methods, which means, of course, these methods aren't directly accessible outside of this class. Same thing if we had variables or anything inside these curly brackets. For example, if I have a anything I do within inside these curly brackets here for this boost speed, you'll notice are only going to exist within here. So if I made a variable put inside boost speed, I couldn't use that same variable in rotate player. It wouldn't happen. That's why we have to put our variables and stuff a lot of times are up here at the top of our class, because it's a different scope. When you put it inside a method, which is what we call a local scope, this is more class-based, so we can kind of use what's known as an instance variable, so we can use them across this entire class here. But what you want to do is set it up in a way that we can use it across multiple classes. Now, the way that we can do that is with the public modifier. So, for example, if I were to replace the word private with public, you'll see it doesn't change anything in our code. In fact, if we run our code, it'll run exactly the same. The difference is that if I make this public, I could now look and call boost speed inside crash detector without any issues because it's a public class. Additionally, if we were to add a public modifier to any of our variables here, we can, of course, use that in our Unity. So we've been using serialized field, which is a great way to get things like our different values here. But we could do the same thing with public. The downside of public, though, is it is a big, wide open thing. Like anybody and everything within the coding environment can use it. So we generally avoid trying to use public when possible. Let's think about what we want this game to do. So as we saw, our player keeps moving even though we've crashed, and we have our sound effects that we might hear some double play and stuff like that. But let's first start with addressing the issue of player movement. So once we crash, we want to stop the player from being able to move. So our crash detector script should have something that is going to come in here into our player control. So let's first by making the framework what we're going to need. So I'm just going to go here under update, and let's go ahead and add a method in here. Now, since we want these two things to be able to talk to each other, we're going to need the public modifier. And I'm going to add in the keyword void here because we're not returning anything. And let's just call this disable. No, not on disable. There we go. Disable control. And open close parentheses, curly brackets. And there we go. We have our method started. Now, what we want to do is set up a way for this disable control to actually kind of work within our game we want it to. And if we think about it, what we're doing is we're effectively taking these two things here, our boost speed and rotate player, and saying don't do that. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to add a bool into our game, and a bool, remember, is just a true or false value. And let's just call this one like can move. And let's start it off to being true because we want it to be true. And we're going to go ahead and add an if can move statement in here. And notice Visual Studio was real helpful for me saying, hey, go ahead and put this in here. I'm just going to move these two lines of code to be inside of the if statement here. So let's go ahead and just move those in so they are nice and tucked in. Perfect. And then here's a quick challenge for you. How can I then, if this is true here, what do I need to do into disable control to go ahead and make it so that way this is no longer the case? All right, so it's a real easy challenge here. All we got to do is say can move. And we're going to, and there's our prop right there, equals false. Boom. All right, so we got can move is equal to false. That should, of course, then just say, hey, this is disabled. Now, at this point, though, even though we say this is disabled, we haven't really done anything with it. Yes, it's true, so this will still work the way everything has worked before, but we haven't done anything to tie it back into our crash detector yet. So we are in Crash Detector and we want to call that method. And well, that method is, remember, belonging to player controller. And we learned something relatively recent here that can actually be of help, which is, of course, the find object of type. So we can go ahead and look for find object of type. And you notice it's trying to say, oh, we want to find a crash detector. Well, that's not what we want here. We want to instead find, in this case, what are we looking for? The player controller, right? We're looking for that player control. And what of that player control do we actually want to use? Well, what we're going to do is jump to the end here, put a set of parentheses, and then we use our dot to find a list of things. And so this is going to bring up the methods that we have available to us from the player control class. And you notice right here we now have, disable control, which is the method that we made right here. So I can actually just go ahead, I'm going to bring that back up here, dot disable control, and I can put that in there. And now we have this method here. So this method that we created is now accessible because we made public. Now I want to show you something real quick. If I take out the public modifier real quick and I go back to Crash Detector, all right, and I put that in here. Now you can see, there's a red squiggle line here. Why is there a red squiggle line here? If you look, it's going to say like, hey, we don't know what this is here. And that's because we've changed the access level of this. So this is no longer a public method. This is now, restricted in what it can actually do. So I'm going to put the public keyword back in there. And if you give it a second here, you'll see that once it kind of updates, boom, there it is. It's now accessible. So public allows this to easily talk across these two classes here because it's accessible for both of these to be used. All right, now that we have that in, let's go ahead and test our game to make sure everything is working the way we expect it to. So when we go ahead and crash, let's go ahead and just flip this guy on over, have him crash. You notice that he's going to now be, upside down. So, and I'm hitting my keyboard after he crashes. And here it goes. And you notice I lose control. Even though I'm hitting the keyboard here, I'll wait for him to go. All right, I'm pressing those arrow keys. He's not moving. Cool. So we have a good amount of control now here that is going to solve that. Now, of course, there's still some other things that we want to address, but at least we've solved that issue of preventing the player from being able to still move after they've already had that crash.